Hi everyone, today I'll be talking about another 10 games that have left my collection and I'll be explaining the reasons for that. So let's get started with the first game. So the first game I'm going to be talking about is Lord of the Rings The Confrontation. Now this is an extremely rare two-player only game where one person takes the role of the shadow player, one person takes control of the fellowship. And it almost has this Stratego vibe where all your player pieces are kind of faced away from your opponent where only you can see where each character is. There is kind of two sides of the board where one side is like the Mordor side, one is the kind of Shire side. And you are moving your player pieces kind of one space at a time into the adjacent regions. Trying to basically, well, if you're the good player, you're trying to get the ring to Mount Doom. And if you are the evil player, you're trying to find the ring bearer or basically eliminate all your opponents or get all your pieces to the other side of the board and destroy the Shire. So quite thematic in that sense. All the different characters in the game have different powers, such as being able to move sideways, where that's not normally a rule. If certain pieces are in certain spots and you go somewhere, then that can automatically eliminate things. So it had lots of different unique player powers between all those different pieces. But on top of that, whenever these two pieces would collide, or from each side that is, they'd be revealed, and then there'd be basically a face-off and a fight. And that would consist of people playing a card from their hand, simultaneously revealing their strength values or special powers, and deciphering who is the winner and deciphering who will be eliminated from the board. So this is a very tense game, extremely confrontational as you'd expect by the name, but it works very well. The only reason this one left my collection was because of that simultaneous card play. I found that a bit too paper, rock, scissors like, and a bit too swingy. And I would have liked it if the gameplay would have been just left to the just to the player pieces. On top of that, I went through a bit of a phase where I didn't really enjoy these kind of head-to-head, brutal games like this, but I've started to kind of adopt them again back into my collection, and annoyingly I probably could have kept hold of this one because it is so valuable now. But a really solid two-player game, but was just a little bit too swingy in the card play for me, and just left me a little bit unsatisfied, but a really good game I'd recommend. That is Lord of the Rings The Confrontation. The next game I'm going to be talking about is immensely popular. This is Lords of Waterdeep. So this is a Dungeons and Dragons themed worker placement game, but don't let that put you off. This is very accessible, regarded as one of the most welcoming and introductory gateway worker placement games out there, and it does that very well. So simple and clean mechanically, just placing workers on these different locations, collecting these resources which are supposed to represent different adventurers, and cashing them in to fulfill contracts. I have a bit of a strange relationship with worker placement games, and particularly ones that don't do anything special, because I think there is a lot of them out there. So many kind of just different re-themes or different skins, all a very similar game. Lords of Waterdeep, I think, was one of the stronger examples, because on this one you could go to certain spots and invest in these buildings, which would make new worker placement spots where people could go to, and could get you a resource if someone went there. So I really liked that. Has some good card play in this one as well. But I think this game had a bit of a ceiling for me. I think once you started playing more heavier and more involved worker placement games, then the need for this one kind of disappeared. And on top of all that, I found that some of the cards in the game called mandatory quests really left me quite annoyed, and I didn't like that mechanism at all, where you could force cards on other players and basically draw them to a halt by having to complete a mission before they were going to do what they planned on doing. And that I didn't quite like that mechanism. I thought it was just a bit annoying, but still a really solid game, one that I'd recommend as an introductory game into kind of Euro mechanisms. The next game I'm going to be talking about is Lords of Xidit. Now, Lords of Xidit is quite an interesting game. It's a programming game. As you have these player boards, you are programming your actions, what you're going to do from turn to turn by travelling around the map, picking up different adventurers, going to slay these monsters. That was all pretty cool. I mean, people could kind of jump into spaces before you if they program their boards in a certain way. So you had to kind of get into the head of your opponent and think what they would do, and kind of divert your course of action accordingly. So that was really cool. Looks very nice, a very beautiful looking game. And the reason this one didn't stay in my collection was, number one, we played it quite a bit in a short space of time, so kind of got a bit fatigued with it. And I think it did have a shelf life as well. There wasn't a tremendous amount of kind of variability and replayability here. But something I really did like about this game was the scoring mechanism, where you would basically be graded on 3 different criteria in 3 different orders, or in different orders from round to round or game to game. And you basically just had to scrape through not being bottom on the first 2 criteria and then win the 3rd criteria. And I thought that was really interesting as you're trying to control these regions, you're trying to build these towers. So that scoring mechanism really did make it stand on its own, and I did like that. A solid game, again, quite an entry-level game, but one that worked well. But ultimately for me, I just had my time with it, had my fun with it, and it was time to move it on. Next game I'm going to be talking about is Magic Maze. Now this is a cooperative real-time game as you are moving around this mall, trying to pick up all these different artifacts of these different adventurers and then get out. You've got a time limit on this game as you're trying to work against these sand timers. And the kind of unique thing about this game is that you don't have your own player piece. Everybody is controlling all the player pieces together, but one person will be moving them kind of north, one will be moving them south or east or west, and you have to move them by just moving around this board. And another kind of wrinkle to the game was you cannot communicate with your teammates at all. And one of the pieces in the game is that if you believe your opponent or your co-workers or your colleagues had to do something to move one of your pieces, you had to put this big red token in front of them to say, look, you need to move this player piece, otherwise we're stuck and we can't do anything. A really fun game, really novel, very innovative, and I did enjoy my time with this one. It had a kind of a mission-based thing where you'd kind of ramp up the complexity as you went through it. But I think, the more I played this one, I did get it to the table quite a few times. I think the novelty wore off. It was time to move it on and try something different. But one that I really enjoyed having in the collection for a long time, and I've had some fun with this one. The next game I'm going to be talking about is Mascarade. Now Mascarade is a rather simple bluffing and hidden roll style game where you are activating these powers on these cards and trying to basically race to get a certain amount of money. The powers are going to do things such as shifting your money with someone else's, stealing money of other players, using top decking cards from a deck and trying to use their powers. So lots of different things these rolls would do. One of the most beautiful looking games I've ever played, probably my favourite artwork actually ever used in a card game. I think it's absolutely stunning. But the gameplay itself was fairly limp. There wasn't a lot this game offered. It was pretty deflating at times, or somewhat almost anticlimactic, I would say, when the game ended, because sometimes someone would kind of fly under the radar, activate a certain card and just win instantly. There's a lot of memory in this game as well, which I tend not to really like. And it boiled down to very simple actions such as activating a certain power, looking at your card, or kind of calling the bluff of another player if you don't believe he was activating a power that he claimed to have had. But some good moments here, some funny moments as you're swapping cards around and things, and I'm just trying to call the bluff of other players, but that's all it was. It did have a glass ceiling of what this could do, and it was pretty standard, and nothing amazing here, which is a shame because the artwork itself is phenomenal. The next game I'm going to be talking about is another really good looking game. This one is Masque of the Red Death. Now this is a game I actually really do enjoy. It's a deduction game, another programming game, as you're trying to work out these different locations that the Red Death is going to attack when the clock hits midnight, and you are basically going to program your individual player board accordingly to try and avoid that death, as well as trying to gain your popularity as the game goes on by schmoozing at these parties, and the winner would be the person with the most popularity who survives by the end of the night. Some really cool ideas here, a good meshing of quite unique mechanisms in terms of the deduction and the programming. I think that worked really well. Again, another beautiful looking game, absolutely stunning. And I think this is a game that would have hit more popularity and should maybe be more popular than it is, because it is very accessible. Again, it looks lovely, and I think it kind of ticks all those boxes which usually make popular games. But I think it just flew somewhat under the radar. And again, I tend not to have... Well, this game does really peak at those higher player counts, and getting higher player counts for me nowadays doesn't happen very often. So that's why it left my collection. The next game I'm going to be talking about is Medium, which is a party game, a word-based one, as you are working with somebody else by playing these word cards, and you're trying to find the medium in between those two word cards. So, for example, someone might say play a card that says animal, someone might play a card that says the ocean, and then you've got to kind of make a middle word out of those on the count of 3. So you go 3, 2, 1, and then say your word, and maybe you both say fish. And if you both said the same word on the first opportunity, then you'd get the maximum amount of points. If you didn't, then you'd work again on those 2 words that you've just said and try and reach the medium between those 2 words. And on the 3rd attempt, if you still failed, then your turn would be over. A really simple game that you'd thought would have been kind of released a long, long time ago, but it actually only came out in the last couple of years. It works well. The only thing for me was that I thought the game dragged on a bit too long. And yeah, just slightly outstayed its welcome. And additionally, because you were only ever working with one player at a time, there would always be some downtime for the other players whilst the other players were taking their turns. And I thought that did kind of bring the energy down in a party style game, which still a really solid party game, one that I did enjoy. But with so many great party games out there, this one wouldn't be hitting the table. So that's why medium left my collection. The next game I'm going to be talking about is Meeple War. Now this is a game that I didn't enjoy. This one is a game, or first off, I really hate games when they use the word meeple in the title. I think it's really cheesy and it doesn't work. But you know, irrespective of that, the gameplay itself I didn't like either. This is a kind of, well, I suppose you'd presume by the name, it's a very confrontational, another war style game. As you are trying to eliminate your players' meeples, building these buildings, putting your workers down on there, moving around the map, having big fights. It has some good ideas in this one, almost this kind of Age of Empire style game where you'd have these cooldowns when you use your buildings. When you'd activate a certain build, or for example at the start of each round, there'd be these kind of progression tracks on each of the buildings where they would go down these tracks, and when they hit certain spots they'd do certain things, such as maybe firing trebuchets and things like that, which was quite cool. But for me, the reason I didn't like this game was it had a very much jarring start and stop almost tempo to it, where you'd build something up, then it would stop. You'd build something up, and then it would stop again because you'd constantly be killing each other. And it just felt a bit, the flow wasn't very good. And again, it just felt jarring, it felt a bit sluggish, and it felt a little bit underdeveloped to me. And it just, maybe on top of all that, it just wasn't my style of game. So naturally it left my collection because I just didn't enjoy it, to be fair. The next game I'm going to be talking about is Merchants of Muziris. This is a really nice little card game, something in the vein of Jaipur, where you are trying to collect these different cards, trying to sell them off to get profit. This one had quite a nice, almost multi-use card mechanism to it, where not only could you use it to sell, but you could use it for the powers themselves on the cards. And it worked really well. I think somewhat of a hidden gem here, and I think this one did actually hit my hidden gem list, because it's a really solid game, and I actually prefer this to Jaipur. Simply, this game wasn't getting played. I'd always go to certain card games if I was to bring out a quick card game. This one was on the slighter, longer scale of things, normally hitting that 30 to 45 minute mark. Really replayable game, lots of variation, loads of different scoring criteria and things. But I really do struggle to get these games that last this amount of time to the table, because I either normally want to play something fast and filler-like, or the more involved Euro strategy games. So those games that kind of fit in that 30 to 45 minute mark do struggle to get to the table, at least for me, because they're not normally the games that I'd suggest to play. But no fault of the game on this one, it just simply was just sitting on my shelf, not being played. But a really solid design, and one that I still enjoy today. And the final game I'm going to be talking about is a game I actually love. This one is Mombasa by one of my favourite designers, Alexander Pfister. This one is an amazing game about colonising Africa. You are basically going into new land, you're trying to control these regions, you're trying to increase your shares in these different companies. A great worker placement aspect to it as well. Loads going on here, some amazing card play in this game as you are playing these cards in these different discard piles, and that kind of dilutes your deck into different piles, and at the end of the round you only get to take one of those decks back, which can increase or make some really strategic decisions in this one. The reason this one left my collection was simply because Maracaibo came out. So Maracaibo is very similar to Mombasa, has a lot of very comparable mechanisms in that one, such as the shareholding and things, almost identical to Mombasa. And I do prefer Maracaibo to Mombasa, and they're both pretty long, pretty involved games with big rule sets. And I thought that if I had Mombasa and Maracaibo in my collection, then I was just diluting the amount of time that I'd play either of them. I'm always trying to keep a streamlined collection, and having two games that are very similar to each other is not optimal for me. I would really love to have this game in my collection, but I think it just isn't logical for me to have both of them. So maybe one day I will get this one back, because the game itself is absolutely incredible. You know, a fantastic Euro game that still stands really high in my top 50. But simply, Maracaibo, I think, is better in every single way, and hence why I'd always go to that one, and this one would just be sat on my shelf collecting dust. So it's a shame, because it's a solid game, way better than most of the things out there on the market, but again, just something too similar out there on my collection, or in my collection. So that's another 10 games that I've got rid of, and given the reasons why, the reasons why I did that. So hopefully you've enjoyed the video, and we will give you an impression about whether these games are going to be for you, whether they're going to have the staying power. So if you have enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other videos too. For everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.